Hey there, my name is Joseph and welcome to my channel if you're new. I'm a longtime fan of Resident Evil games and I've beaten most of them in the franchise. I call myself a fan of those games. However, after beating Resident Evil 8, I gotta say I don't think that this game will stand the test of time. It'll just be another cool action game collecting dust on our shelves. Now before you start writing, let me explain to you what I mean by that so you can see my point of view and we can discuss it together. You know, certain games stand the test of time and become classics, and others kind of disappear into obscurity despite being good games in every right. Call of Duty comes to mind as the perfect example of the latter. It's always interesting to see long-running franchises evolve, change, and adapt to the times. Resident Evil was the staple of one of the earliest examples of a true survival horror game with its tanky controls and slow-paced gameplay. But I still remember like it was yesterday when Resident Evil 4 introduced its third-person camera with a bigger focus on action-oriented gameplay. It became an instant classic in my books and one of the only games I personally rank as my favorite to this day next to Metal Gear Solid 1, Last of Us 1, among a couple other games like Onimusha 2. I must have 100% Resident Evil 4 3 to 4 times and beaten it even more than that. Just the sheer adrenaline rush you get from the first village fight against the Ouroboros and panicking of barricading and fending off hordes of enemies, it just felt magical and fresh at that time. But arguably Resident Evil 4 was the start of a more experimental times with the franchise, because when Resident Evil 5 came out, it was a huge success, selling over 12.1 million copies worldwide across all platforms, but it was criticized as it started losing its horror survival identity. Then we got Resident Evil 6, which was considered by many a mediocre game at best, which I would agree with. And then there was a downward turn for the franchise in general with its several subpar entries into the genre with such things like Operation Raccoon City, Revelations 1 and 2, and the Umbrella Corps. Now they were fun to be had in those games, but they didn't live up to the legendary name and the reputation of Resident Evil. And I think that forced Capcom to innovate with Resident Evil 7, changing the perspective yet again to a first-person shooter game, and simultaneously bringing it back to a slower-paced horror game, and at the same time infusing it with a kind of modern Western style of horror story and gameplay, which proved to be a huge success with selling over 8.7 million copies as of February 2021. And it looks like Capcom was gonna abandon its third-person perspective for the franchise along with a cast of colorful characters and pursue this new direction, and then bam, we get Resident Evil 2 Remake, which was phenomenal, and then we got the Resident Evil 3 Remake, which had more mixed reviews. I personally loved it, but some people felt that it was too short and there was not enough to do as there were in Resident Evil 2. And then it brings me to Resident Evil Village, which brings back to the story of Ethan Winters and the first-person perspective, as well as introduce a lot more cleavage to the franchise. Internet going crazy for Lady Dimitrescu absolutely blew my mind how 30-year-old men turned into 12-year-old horny teenagers, but whatever, let's just move on with that. What I want to say is just, I just beat Resident Evil 8, and I have to say I felt conflicted about it when I beat the game. It tried so hard to be the best of both Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 7, but it doesn't really manage to capture the magic of either. Before all you hardcore Resident Evil fans go crazy, I'm not saying the game is bad, by no means. Actually, I quite enjoyed it, but it's apparent it has lost this kind of horror identity that we know Resident Evil to be. And let me explain what I mean by that. If you disagree, you can let me know down below in the discussion in the comments so we could talk about it. But this game doesn't know whether it wants to be a horror game or an action game. I was not scared even for a blip throughout the whole experience and didn't find the shooting mechanics all that fun either in comparison to Resident Evil 4 or Resident Evil 2. I cannot stand how he aims down the sight. I remember when I first made that criticism on my earlier video, many fans got really upset at me and came to me with excuses why Ethan holds the gun this way. He's not a professional. Well, now we know he's military trained, so there's no excuses for him to be holding a gun to the side, or at least that perspective in the game kind of looks weird. But that's a minor nitpick. Do not get me wrong, the game has amazing atmosphere, setting, fantastic exploration and action set pieces. There's fun to be had 100%. However, Mercenaries mode is nowhere near as intense or as fun as it was in Resident Evil 4 or 5. But that's due to the combat mechanics, which I feel were half-baked. It has some crazy wacky villains which border on the line of ridiculous, but somehow it worked for the most part. Ethan, however, is a boring character, and actually with every life-threatening injury he sustained, I laughed a little bit inside. And once we get spoilers here, once we get to the twist of the game, the reveal that he's actually dead and then he was, turned into molded, that completely left me baffled. For every good design choice in this game, there's one that makes me question what they were trying to achieve with this game overall. I thought they should have continued the strain what they did with Resident Evil 7 and keep it slower paced, more horror focused, but improve on the weaknesses like enemy variety, combat mechanics being a little bit better, and centered around the whole survival horror gameplay genre, and a weak main protagonist that they could have kind of worked on and made it more interesting. I think most of the characters in the Resident Evil franchise are pretty interesting. Chris Redfield, Claire Redfield, and of course Leon Kennedy. It's a shame because it's a quality game, but it will be forgotten because it didn't bring anything new to the table, and it just kind of will try to rehash what previous titles did great, like Resident Evil 4 and 7. They tried to cast the widest net, but in my opinion, it just didn't work. I'm sure it'll sell millions of copies, but I'm talking about 5 or 6 years down the line. Unfortunately, I don't think they'll be talking about this title on the top list of Resident Evil games. That's how I felt after beating the game, and I had fun, and I still recommend it to my friends. I think the package you're getting is pretty meaty. You get Resident Evil 8, you get Mercenaries for those that enjoy it, and you get Reverse, the multiplayer mode, which is not amazing, but it's free, and you get it to kind of pass the time. But I don't think I'd ever replay it again. I think I'll go back to Resident Evil 2 and 3, the remakes, and Resident Evil 4, which is my favorite title in the franchise. But I want to know, what do you think of this game? Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? And what were your overall thoughts about this game when you beat it? And how does it rank in the whole Resident Evil pantheon for you? I felt like it was a little bit underwhelming to me as a Resident Evil game because of those. They didn't commit to that Resident Evil formula they've created. They kind of took a step back and tried to dip their toes back in Resident Evil 4. But I would love to hear from you guys. Did you feel the same way, or do you think I went left field here and you don't agree? Let me know down below in the comments. But guys, also if you enjoyed this video, make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel if you want more gaming news on this channel, along with gaming reviews, impressions, and various other things. Enjoy the rest of your time, guys. Enjoy your day. Peace out.